Conversations across time. 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 Conversations across time.
Hi, I'm Mark Hoffman, proud member of the Conversations Across Time team and a retired history teacher. Tonight's show I portray Ulysses S. Grant, President of the United States from 1869 to 1877 during the critical period of Reconstruction. I also was the 8th president of the National Rifle Association. As you will see, that becomes important. Also on the panel this evening are the show's hosts, attorney Vivienne Crawford and attorney Irv Madnick, who was involved in many cases that involve gun violence. During the show this evening, the panel will discuss the bastardization of the Second Amendment and how the original charter of the National Rifle Association has also been bastardized to make sure that every American thinks that it's all right to own guns. We will discuss how money, lobbying, political action committees, propaganda, and racism influence people's perception of gun ownership and the critical problem of mass shootings in the United States of America. Stay tuned for a very provocative and educational show. The situation is critical. In this country, it is easier to buy an AR-15 assault weapon than this stogie I hold in my hand. Enjoy the show.
Good evening and welcome once again to Conversations Across Time. I'm joined again by our guest, President Ulysses Grant. Thank you for agreeing to come back. Thank you for being here.
It's good to be back.
And I also...
It's an important topic.
It is important, and I'm happy that you agreed to come back, and Irv, that you were available. Irv Madnick, who, as I introduce all the time as defense counsel and someone who just has very strong opinions about what is going on today. So we are fortunate that President Grant was able to get back, because since we spoke with you last week, there has been an election. And that election has certainly a lot of ramifications for what it is that we were talking about. We were discussing gun control. And so I'm just going to open it up and ask, first of all, let's give our audience some background, if you would, Irv, on what happened with last week's election.
Sure. Ordinarily, the election that took place last Tuesday would have been generally insignificant in the total scheme of things. It's an off-year election, and there are no national offices that were really being disputed at the time, but they're mostly local elections. What was interesting about it was that the two states where there were gubernatorial elections, though the Democrats were pre-election favorites and they both won, but the margin of victory, especially in Virginia, was way, way, way beyond what the polls had indicated they might be. I mean, it was a toss, generally considered to be a toss-up, and the governor's race was won by the Democrat by about 9 points, which was really amazing. But the most amazing thing that happened in this election, and why it's important in general, and most important for what we're talking about in terms of gun rights, is that the down ballot races, the local races for delegates to the local assemblies, to the local legislatures, were unbelievable in the sense that Democrats carried their weight in ordinarily places that Republicans had won for a century. Just to use local counties, for instance, you take Delaware County and Chester County. There were countywide elections for controller and judge and district attorney and so forth. And in both of those counties, in over 60 or 70 years, or even more in some cases, a Democrat had never been elected. And lo and behold, the Democrats just about swept all of those seats in those counties. Now, the thing that was really interesting were the exit polls, not only in Virginia, But the exit polls in Pennsylvania as well. And by the way, New York, there were also instances in New York and Westchester County where the Republicans had always been in control, where everything shifted toward the Democrats. And by the way, a lot of women were elected, a tremendous amount of women, and a lot of women turned out to vote, which was incredible. And I think that was probably obviously an anti-Trump.
I think it was definitely anti-Trump because after the day after the election, and they were interviewing candidates, people that had won, and they were surprising victories, and they said, "Well, we came out because we had to show that we have a voice."
I think that's true, and of course, Democrats were concerned that they wouldn't be able to get enough people to do that, but I think they did. And, and a lot of these Democrats, by the way, a lot of these Democrats, you have to understand, actually voted for Trump.
Yes.
And even the women, even some women did. I don't know why, but they did, and I think that they found out after.
They were new to the political arena.
The traditional Republicans that my party was, obviously people know I was a Republican. They believed in things way different than the Republican Party today under President Trump has evolved into. And so I think they're rebelling against what the traditional ideals of my party were. Of course, we were the anti-slavery party. We were also the party of business. And they're even going away from competitive business. And the fact of the matter is our party would never tolerate some of the candidates they are putting up for office. You have a man running for the Senate seat, and I respect the Senate. I always had good relations with the Senate. Roy Moore, who is accused of being a pedophile at the very least, dating young girls. We would not hear that. That totally.
So would you even be a Republican today?
No.
That would not be.
No, because I like to think of myself as whatever my economic philosophies were, which are pro-business and things like that. But I like to think of myself as a person that believed in equality, which I proved in terms of my presidency, and which the Republican Party doesn't believe in today. In fact, some people say all Republicans aren't racist, but most racists are Republicans.
Okay.
And I certainly wasn't a racist. And we had a degree. I mean, we had scoundrels in the party, and we had scandals, but we respected women, and we respected minorities, and that all changed. I guess in the 1970s and 80s, my Republican Party changed. But going back to Attorney Madnick, what he was saying, I think it's important that he continue about what might happen with gun control and those people.
Those down ballot races.
What happened, and I think what was really significant were the exit polls, and I was just about to say that before. The exit polls showed, and of course the Republicans would have thought that since this tax reform legislation is on the table now, or tax cut legislation, whatever you want to call it, is on the table now, that would have been the driving force in the electorate during this election. But the exit polls showed that the number one consideration was health care, that people were very, very much concerned about their health care. And of course we know that the health care proposals that the Republicans put out had like a 13% rate of approval amongst the people generally, so you know where they stood on that. And the second most important thing was not tax reform, not immigration, which of course those are the two things that the Republicans are stressing, but guns. And of course a lot had to do with the fact that all these people were killed in the church
2 days before the election.
2 days before the election, but it was the same outcry when the kids were killed at Sandy Hook, all these soft targets being killed by people with either mental health issues or racist issues that have access to assault weapons. And as we said before, and I think in our last show we mentioned it, that if you polled the people generally, that most people, a large majority, probably 75 to 80% of the people, if you ask them whether an ordinary person should be allowed to have an assault weapon or whether assault weapons should be allowed to be sold, I think they would be against that. So, and the other interesting thing about, and you asked President Grant about would he be a Republican today? I think if you ask a lot of people, not everybody, of course. If you ask a lot of people, you say, are you a Republican or you want to be a Republican? I think a lot of people would say no. And then you ask them, well, are you a Democrat then? And they would say no to that too. And I think if you ask a lot of Democrats, are you a Democrat or do you want to be a Democrat? And I think a lot of people would say no. I think most people, probably about 45 to 50% of the population identify themselves today as independents. And of course, independents don't have one cloak that they can use to vote for. They don't have a vote. And I think, when you look at why Trump won, and you look at the ideals, look at Sanders, for instance, I think if you combine those people together, they would have made a majority for sure, and they were all populist. It was it wasn't necessarily nationalist.
The problem with
populist.
people being independent and the political system, and of course, we all know that my party, the Republican Party, started as a third party.
Sure.
In rebellion against the Democrats and the Whigs.
Sure.
But the problem with independents is they don't vote in primaries.
I was getting ready to say this primary issue.
And primaries determine who the candidates are, and especially in the presidential race. So independents have no say until the actual general election day. And by that, I mean, if the perfect example is Roy Moore in Alabama. He wins the primary. He's almost guaranteed to win the general election, and all the independents. But if there were open primaries and independents could vote, it would change. But being an independent now, in terms of what's happening in the political system, because it gives the power to the NRA and all the lobbies and the political action committees more than the individual
What
vote.
about open primaries? I mean, do you think that that's a solution that we should be looking towards? Because you're right, Irv.
It's one of them for sure.
Yeah.
But that sounds to me like that's one of the things that we should be looking towards trying to do.
Absolutely. And the thing is that when you tag somebody a Republican, you tag somebody a Democrat, then automatically all these things that are associated with what the Republicans want, of course, big business and tax breaks for the wealthy and voter suppression, and then you go to the Democratic side, and people that identify with the Democrats are free health care for everybody, and all left wing, right wing, and there's no voice for the people in the middle, and there's no way, it doesn't seem, that the responsible legislators, responsible senators, and responsible Congress people that are in the middle can form, these kind of coalitions to make the voice of the independent heard. So that's one thing that's necessary.
Well, the thing is, don't forget
open primaries, and the other thing
you gave the statistic that 80% of the people are in favor of gun control, but that has no bearing on getting back to the primaries because the NRA, which I was the 8th president of, now became one of the most powerful lobbies in the country. So they control who runs in the primaries, who gets the money, who gets nominated, and then who gets elected. So both the Democrats and the Republicans bow down to the National Rifle Association. So even though the electorate in a democracy would say, let's vote, let's have a referendum on banning assault weapons, that would win easily. It'll never come to that because they control the candidates who are going to even be on the ballot.
I think what we concluded almost in the last few shows that we talked about the bastardization of the NRA and the bastardization of the Second Amendment. I think we also came to the conclusion of the bastardization of democracy, because the lobbying system, and of course the fact that there are no open primaries, the lobbying system, the gerrymandering that goes on, has taken away the one person, one vote that the democracy is built on. I mean, if you take popular votes on a lot of these issues, you're going to find that, first of all, when they have the polling, they say, well, what about the Republicans in Congress? How do they poll? Well, they poll around 17 or 18% favorable. And the Democrats, by the way, only poll about 25% favorable.
How can the people today, the general elect, believe in democracy when your leader, when your president, kisses the rear end of one of the most notorious dictators in the world today, and he seems to like strong dictators who don't believe in democracy more than he likes leaders who come out of democracies. He gives more respect to the Vladimir Putin, a man from Russia, than he does to the Prime Minister of Germany, who is elected democratically.
But he's a product of the bastardization of democracy. Because if this was a true democracy, the popular vote would have elected Hillary Clinton and not him.
College, yeah.
So that's the democratic way, not the electoral college or the gerrymandering in all these districts that allow these Republican congressmen and Republican legislators to be in power.
I read a statistic.
And it works both ways, by the way, Democrats and Republicans.
I agree with you that the democracy is becoming bastard. I read a statistic that 85% of the supporters of President Trump, if need be, would postpone the election of 2020, which means they would want him to be a dictator.
They would want him to be a dictator. That's exactly what that means.
That's very scary because they don't understand the implications of that, obviously, and that goes to the even bigger problem, which we do when we talk about it. And we've talked about it in a lot of different shows and a lot of different settings about education. And people are not, that's one reason they're able to take over, why special interests are able to take over, because people really aren't that educated on the issues. They don't understand the issues, and I think that's a major problem too.
I am fascinated by a story that is just now a blip on the radar, having to do with, we know we've been talking about Facebook, and everyone is up in arms about Facebook, but it seems that Silicon Valley is more in bed with Russia than even we imagined. Now, 2 weeks ago there were hearings, and they had these executives come in from Facebook. I mean, Zuckerberg didn't show up, but he sent a minion, and we are now discovering that Facebook is more insinuated in our lives and making decisions in terms of how people vote with their news reporting. So I'm just wondering, when you talk about the bastardization, you're right. It's the bastardization of the Second Amendment, it's the bastardization of the NRA, and it is the bastardization of democracy.
Well, let's look at Facebook for a minute. Facebook's a publicly held company. Their number one priority is profits. Mm-hmm. Profits for themselves and the shareholders. Well, they really don't care where the money comes from. And most companies don't care where the money comes from. Look at all of the major corporations in this country that sell. We're in a global economy. They sell to Russia, they sell to Iran, they sell to Iraq.
But these media outlets that you have now, of course, we had newspapers, and some of the newspaper stories were pretty vicious. However, the fact is they don't have to take the money. Fox News, I think, canceled a big ad campaign by the gentleman from California who's circulating the petition to impeach your current president, and it was a $1 million buy, and they wouldn't run it, so they don't have to run that stuff. So.
That's an editorial decision. Newspapers have editorial decisions. Newspapers are free to run whatever they want to run, but they're also free not to run whatever they want to run. That's part of the freedom of speech.
Right, but
and that's a suppression of it to a certain extent. But again, that's determined by monetary.
But I think that's what. And so
I'm saying that Mark Zuckerberg doesn't have to take money if he knows it's coming from Russian.
Well, I think they said that, and they said they're going to look at it more closely. But I'm sure that the impetus was to take the money because that helped the bottom line.
Well, wasn't the original, and this is the blip that I'm talking about, and I don't have
Here's how we could get gun control. This is my we got to get Putin to tell Trump that gun control is the most important thing he can do.
And then it'll happen.
It'll happen like that.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right. But the blip was when Zuckerberg was looking for capitalization for Facebook, that a Russian oligarch, and that's that little story that hasn't made its way into the public yet. And a Russian oligarch actually was the major investor for Facebook. It just seems to me that Putin has had a long-range plan for this country, and Donald Trump is just the dupe that they decided should be sitting in the White House to make his being Putin's plans come to reality.
Well, it seems clear that they have a lot of things on Trump. I mean, this dossier that came out that they poo-pooed obviously had a lot of merit. I mean, they said the most salacious part of that dossier, by the way, was that he had 5 prostitutes come to his room, etc., and perform some kind of perverse sex act. Well, everybody said, well, that's crazy, that's ridiculous. Meantime, his bodyguard testified that they did offer him 5 women, so there was an element. Of course, he wasn't going to say they came there. You know, he was his main man, his body man. He wasn't going to. He said, well, I stood by the door for a couple of minutes and I left. He was saying that he didn't know what happened. But the point is, it corroborated the most salacious part of that, or almost corroborated, let me put it that way, the most salacious part of that dossier. And all those other things that they had on him, which were business-related, indicate that they do have a lot on him. And
my
that's
good
why
friend William Seward, they duped him and he bought Alaska.
Okay,
Well,
yeah, sure, yeah.
But at least with Alaska, though, there is some little background
And there was
because
no
we
Facebook then either, by the way.
but because we needed Russia actually protected the West Coast because the Confederacy was trying to get arms in, and so a way to pay them back for having done it.
I agree
And
with
you
you,
can
Ms.
see
Crawford,
Russia from
and Secretary Seward was a great man and he did the right thing, but he was criticized unmercifully for buying Alaska because the population at the time thought he was duped by the Russians.
And well, they accused him
They
of being
call it
duped.
Sewards Folly, in fact.
I remember that. But the thing that was interesting about that is it was not until years later that we learned that in fact the Confederacy was going to be getting armaments in through, which was, I don't know, but I believe there's some evidence to say that the Rothschilds were interested in being the bank for the Confederacy. Therefore, they were going to help with the purchase of arms, which would have come in through San Francisco. So the Russian Navy protected the ports so that they could not arrive with armaments. They blockaded it. Yeah. So they called it Sewards Folly, and that's one instance where, in order to be able to pay Russia back, we ended up, well, we'll buy Alaska. Which, considering that out of that deal,
it's a beautiful place.
And we did get. So I think maybe some good things came out of it. But you're right. At the time, it was Sewards Folly. But that was before. Russia was the evil empire that it is now.
Right. But listen, no question, Russia's an evil empire, and no question that Trump's in their back pocket. And again, and I go back to what we're talking about. He was elected because of the fact that the democratic process has been bastardized, and that's what's happened, and that's why, by the way, this past election is really, really important, because young people who had never voted before, people that had voted, for a Republican or Democrat, they were casting a protest vote.
Yes.
And it just so happened that the Republicans being in power and offering all this other crap with tax reform for the wealthy, they were an easy target here. But it could just as easily have been the Democrats that were the target in certain circumstances. So this movement, I think, shows hope for the future.
Even if the Democrats and these trends continue, they call it a blue wave, whatever you people call it nowadays. Even if they win, will they have the guts to stand up for gun control to the NRA? And that's the unanswered question. They might put Democrats in power and control the House because of economic reasons, because of the dislike for the tax reform, and also their idea of what a president should be and what the current president is. But will the Democrats have enough gumption to press for at least a ban on assault weapons and buck the NRA and face all the money that will come up against them in the next election? Because once people get in power, they want to stay in power, and the NRA can keep them in power.
Yeah, but wouldn't they really be stupid if 75 to 80% of the people in the country are against assault weapons? Wouldn't they make that a major point in running for office and garner those votes? And once they garner those votes, then they're going to have to be responsible to those people.
The problem with your democracy now is that the people don't get out to vote unless they're prodded to get out to vote, and the money in politics on all the sides, the NRA and the other great lobbies that control the government today, They're the ones that put the money out and get the people who they want out to vote and who they don't. That's why they control elections. They nominate who they want and they elect who they want. So the key to me is not just getting the is to change money in politics where one man, one vote counts all the time, and it's not money and it's not gerrymandering. It's just the pure democracy, going back to what the concept of the Greeks had in terms of a pure democracy where the citizens all voted, and that's the way it was.
Well, look what happened when Trump was elected. He didn't spend hundreds of millions of dollars like the Democrats did.
Well, Russia
And yet
spent money.
he had his finger on a populist movement. Now, he changed that movement and made it a divisive, jingoistic, ridiculous movement, but still, he was able to do that without the money. So he
But
didn't
he had
have
Facebook.
to.
He had Facebook doing those targeting
Well,
targeted
he
ads.
didn't control
Brent.
Facebook.
You
It just
can't-
it
you
worked
can't-
that way because the Russians were able to invade Facebook.
I guess he was Speaker of the House at one time. Tip O'Neill said all politics are local. You can't conflate what happens in a presidential election that what goes on locally with the money and how.
But that's just what happened in this election. That's what happened in this local. That's why this local election is a microcosm of what can happen on a national level. You're right. Everything does have to start at a local level.
So you're
Yeah,
referring
this
but,
is
but
exactly what happened.
I'm saying if the Democrats were to win the House of Representatives, that the NRA will put pressure on those Democrats not to pass any gun control legislation.
I think
It's been proven. They've had
I
under
know,
Obama
they
had
would do that. They would, but I think at this point, I think that the will of the people being so dominant in this, 80%, and I think it is 80%, the people are. I'm not saying eliminate all guns and confiscate
assault
guns.
weapons.
I'm
That
talking
would be
about
the
the assault weapon
assault
ban.
weapons
Keep
and-
in mind,
and-
there
and-
was an assault weapon ban that was passed back
Under
in the
Clinton,
90s.
under Clinton.
It was only on a temporary basis, but it was passed. And I think it would be.
And he
passed
backed off of that because he was getting so much political pressure, and the Democrats were getting so much political pressure. That's why they backed off it. In fact, Hillary spoke out against it one time when she was running. She got criticized for it, because she talked about the assault weapons and she tied it in with race in the inner city.
Yes.
So
Yeah, but-
they back, even the Democrats, even the Clintons backed off of that when it became a political albatross
But
for
there
them.
wasn't that many mass killings as there are today then. I mean, since that time,
That-
there's
that-
been a
that is-
myriad of mass killings by assault weapons. There weren't any. The assault weapon was just a bad thing.
Let me just-
But now it's been used to
But-
kill multiple innocent people.
When Kennedy was assassinated, everybody demanded gun control.
1968, and the
When-
NRA
it wasn't
supported
an
it.
assault weapon.
NRA supported it.
Right, but it was a mail order.
Yeah, they did. The NRA
right.
supported it.
And then when King was assassinated, Bobby Kennedy, and then
Handgun.
but then the Brady law when
Yes.
Reagan
Right.
and all of that
They
fell
weren't-
by
that
the
wasn't
way
an assault weapon
fell
either.
by the wayside. The Brady law, you can go, and I said it before. I said it on another show. You could. This cigar that I purchased as myself, as a prop, which cost a little over $2. I had to give them my driver's license. They had to run the driver's license through the scene. I had a sign. I could go to a gun show and buy an AR-15 and not have to go through any of that. That's insane. It's insane. It's insane. And unless the politicians, the people demand, the people got to say, this is what we want. If you don't do this, you're out. Not what the NRA says.
Well, at the local level, that's what happened this time, because guns was a primary issue. Gun control was a primary issue. And I think it'll be a primary issue. I'm sure a lot of people are for the NRA, but it's not unlimited. It's not a right that's unlimited. You can interpret the Constitution that way if you want, but it's still not an unlimited right.
Well-
And there are limitations.
We are now seeing this sweep of people who realize that the lunatics are running the asylum. If you look at Las Vegas in 2017, 58 people murdered. Orlando, 2016, 49 people murdered. Virginia Tech, 207, 32
Charleston.
people. Sandy Hook,
Charleston.
and
Sandy
Charleston,
Hook.
and all with assault
This is all
weapons.
after the
all with
assault
assault
weapon ban
weapons. America's gun homicide rate is more than 25 times that of any other developed nation. And on that note, thank you, President Grant. Thank you, Irv Madnick. This has been a spirited discussion, and I ask you to join us next week for another interesting conversation across time. Thank you.
Conversations across time. Conversations across time. Conversations across time. Conversations across time. Conversations across time.